climate change and tips for tackling it.
Hi, today on One Planet, we're with Danya. And Danya is with a group called Terra Birds here in Flagstaff. She is going to talk about composting. And actually, Danya, I would like you to speak about how you feel, your psychological feeling about climate change and the action you decided to take.
Sure. So my psychological response to climate change, as I'm sure many people my age feel, obviously anxious, obviously depressed, obviously feeling like it's not necessarily this generation, my generation, that caused this, but we're just kind of getting the leftovers from previous generations and their foolish actions and decisions, either from lack of knowledge or lack of compassion for future generations. But you know, there's this really famous saying that's very popular, and it's something along the lines of, give me the power to know or to change the things I can, to accept the things I can't, and to know the difference, right? And that's not exactly that, but one of the things that I do is I recognize I can only control my actions, and I can only affect, hopefully in a positive way, the actions of those I interact with. And so the things that I do in my personal life to combat climate change, right? Try not to use water unnecessarily, try to grow my own food when I can, try to use as little energy as possible, try to buy from thrift stores, and don't buy clothes firsthand, and also composting, which is what we're going to be talking about today. So those are just some things that I do personally in my life to try and respond or react.
Do you feel like this action helps you psychologically?
You know, I'm sure you can break it down like that. I think for me, it's one of those things where it's just a lifestyle and it's a practice. So everybody has different parameters of how they can choose to live with themselves, right? It definitely gives me peace of mind and allows me to sleep at night, knowing that I am doing everything in my power and actually trying to live in a more conscious, intentional, sustainable way than maybe my ancestors did, and not like super ancestors, but talking about from the Industrial Revolution forward, right? It's something that you can't let consume you, right? You got to move forward, but you do need to acknowledge it, right? And everybody's different. For me, it helps to look to the future and try to have a positive outlook, to have some hope still. And yeah, I would say that.
You know, that's really what this show is all about. The tips that we can use and the positive outlook. There are solutions to this problem and that we're facing. We're facing a big problem, but tips that people can use that help them feel like help them sleep at night, as you say.
Absolutely. And you know, it's scientifically proven that positive reinforcement is the way to catalyze change in this world. There's a lot to be said for motivation. There's a lot to be said for looking at the glass half full. And it's acknowledging, yeah, there are things that are challenging. There are things that we need to overcome. But constantly talking about it in a doom and gloom state of mind is not productive, right? And so, like I said, I like to move forward. I heard this really beautiful metaphor when I was going to school at the University of Texas in Austin, and it was one of my mentors who said, life is like you're driving a car, and you're always moving forward and you're always looking outside of your windshield, and you have to like check your rear mirror and check your side mirrors every once in a while to see what's going on behind you and to be aware of it, right? But you're always moving forward and you have to look outside the windshield because that's the direction you're going.
And that's a nice metaphor.
Right?
I like that.
Yeah.
That's pretty
Thank you, Julia Barnard.
Thank you, Julia Barnard.
Yeah.
Well, composting. You decided that's near and dear to your heart. Talk a little bit about composting. Why is it important?
Sure. So food waste is really organic matter, but also food waste is a large percentage of what people throw away, what households send to the landfill when they put out their trash. And it's connected to waste minimization, and we as a species could significantly decrease the amount of waste that we create and that we bury under the ground in landfills or like burn in incinerators if we just separated out our food material and leftovers versus like the plastics and the materials that cannot decompose as quickly. So I started composting, one, because I realized it was most of my waste, right? So when I took out my trash, most of it I realized was green matter that could go back into the earth. And two, it was super simple and it was super easy, you know? I just looked up a few tips on YouTube, to be honest, when I first started this endeavor a couple of years ago. And I lived in an apartment at the time, and I just had a worm bin and had it in a plastic container and used that in my little raised bed garden that I made from bookshelves that I literally found in a dumpster and brought back to my apartment. And now I live in a house that has like a yard, and so I can compost on a larger scale. But no matter where you live, it's just really doable and easy.
How do you do it in an apartment?
So the way that I did it is I bought one of those like 15-gallon containers, one of those plastic bins, and you want to have a mixture of green matter and brown matter, right? And so your greens are your peels from fruits, your leftovers from vegetables, it can be lawn clippings, anything that's really green, right? And then your browns are kind of the decomposers, the things that have been dead already. So you have dried leaves, you can have mulch, so like wood pieces can work really well. You can also have, if you just have dirt and soil, that also can be added in the mixture. If you have like pine needles, that'll eventually break down. And the ratio of that depends on the climate that you're in, right?
Oh, really?
Yeah, so like depending on how much water you get in your climate, what the temperatures are, the ratios of green to brown are gonna fluctuate a little bit, but there's definitely a sweet spot. And the way that you can tell if it's a sweet spot is if after your compost is broken down, it should smell good. It should smell, and people don't really think that compost like smells good, but when your compost is turning into humus, it should smell rich, it should smell like life. And if it smells rotten and if it smells bad, then your ratios are off a little bit. Maybe you need to add a little bit more browns, a little bit more greens. But in compost, there are the main ingredients of your greens, your browns, and water and air, right? So very similar to a lot of the elements that also go into the soil.
So if somebody wanted to start composting, their first step would be to find out what climate they're in.
Yeah, you definitely can do that, or you just start and it's guess and check, right?
Oh.
It's guess and check. Get your greens, get your browns, add the air that you add is when you turn it, so you want to turn it at least once a week. Spray it with water, not too much. You don't want water to sit, but you do want it to be moist. And just experiment with it, play with it. It could take a while. You find out, sure, do some research, right? If you live in northern Arizona, like I do, you might want to see what is the composting ratio that works best in high arid desert. Versus, you know, if you live on the Gulf of Mexico, like I used to in Houston, it's going to be different because climate is different everywhere.
I'm thinking about Alaska and
Right.
Florida. They're so different.
Right.
And Alaska and New York are so different.
Absolutely.
And Florida and New York are so different. So it definitely has a really important role to play where you live.
And what I did for my bin also is I got worms and just threw them in there because worms speed up the process. And so if you have worms in your bin, you can be a little bit more flexible with your ratio and you can be a little bit off because they're like your stabilizer. And so they're your stabilizer that eats the greens, it eats the food products that you put in there, the fruit and vegetable products, right? And then their worm castings are like what they poop out, and that's just really nutrient dense. And so that can just make your composting process a lot easier, and you have a lot less checking to do because the guesses get balanced out by the worms. They do the problem solving for you.
I like that. Anything that can work for me is a good thing.
Absolutely, absolutely.
So you've then turned compost into soil.
Yeah.
And have you grown things?
Absolutely, yeah. So I used my worm bin / compost bin to be the amendment for my herb garden that I planted when I lived in the apartment complex with those raised beds from bookshelves. So instead of buying compost or buying fertilizer, I just used what was in my bin, my plastic bin. And my herbs were so happy that year. This year, because I moved to a house that just had more arable land options, I expanded, and my roommates used to run a composting business. So our entire backyard is super rich soil, and there are 2 giant composting piles that I add to and that I turn and I'll water every once in a while. And that was the amendment for all my squash, my zucchini, my strawberries, my corn, my beans. I grew a lot this year.
Do you feel like working in the dirt, composting and working in the dirt makes you feel closer to nature?
Oh my God, it's so anchoring. It's so very human. It's just grounding. Honestly, we live in this world where there's a lot of wild concepts of reality and truth. But when you work with the land, there's no question about authenticity. There's no question about what is or isn't. It's just these very tangible rules of the world that you get to play in, that we as humans live in, but we have created all of these distractions. We kind of have forgotten our roots as living beings on this earth. And growing your food, harvesting your food, it's one of the most human things you can do. So something else about growing your own food and creating your own compost and soil and amendments is it's a lot more nutritious than anything you can get at the grocery store. And it's just packed with nutrients, one, because the produce is closer to being alive. All the stuff that we get from grocery stores has been picked weeks, if not months ago, and so that food is actually dead. And when it's dead, it's lost the majority of its nutrients. But when you grow your own food and you pick your food and you eat it, you know, the same day, the next day, within the week, you are just getting so many more health benefits than you would from anything that you could purchase at the store. And it's the same for if you go shopping at the farmer's market or if you go shopping at a local co-op. It really is night and day, and not only is it better for you, but it also tastes better. So if you have the capacity, you know, to do whatever it is that you can, not only is it better for your mental health and well-being because it's anchoring and it's grounding, but also it's physically better for your body because your body can break down the nutritionally dense foods that you are growing.
Well, thank you, Danya. I think we've covered enough that people can do research if they need to know more. I really like the comment that you made about worm castings. I'm going to try that next time I...
You need any, I'll just give you a shovel full of my soil and you'll have worms for life.
I know that winter's coming on and many, many climates. And so would you recommend that people then bring their compost bin inside? continue it? Or?
Absolutely. If it gets cold where you live, absolutely. If you have it in a plastic bin, bring it in at night just so that it doesn't freeze. And it will hopefully survive through the season. I know my worms did when I brought them in. And it gets pretty cold here in Flagstaff. It gets like to 5 degrees. So I know you were from Alaska. And so if you're in Alaska or other very cold climates, definitely bring that in at night.
Okay. All right. Thank you so much, Danya. And Danya is here teaching students how to compost and grow and things like that. And so I really appreciate that. Young people know more and they're more grounded when they do that.
Absolutely. Our mission is to empower youth through gardening and agriculture sustainable practices. A little can go a long way.
Well, thanks again and have a great day.
Thanks.